Hi, Brittany. I thought it might just be easier to just record you a video. So, gosh, where to even start? So I have had levels 1 and 2 of the Gottman training. I don't know if you've had any experience with the Gottmans. They are written a ton of books. My favorite book by them is called The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. And in fact, I do a whole marriage seminar based on that. Um, and really, a big part of their philosophy is looking at the communication between the partners and identifying, and it seems like really small common sense tweaks, but it honestly can have a big impact. So, for example, the Gottmans would say they've identified 4 horsemen: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And so when these dysfunctional patterns of communication build up over time, it creates like a toilet bowl of bad decisions almost, where you get in this rut of communicating with one another. So that's one of the first ones is to kind of look at what are the patterns for how you communicate with each other, and do we need to set up some boundaries around those, or some fair fighting rules, for example, or mediated conflict. Another piece of the Gottman is we can do an online assessment, which is a survey that both of you would take, and it helps me identify, and then I share with you, areas where the two of you are stuck, and helps us figure out where are some areas where if we could help in that area, it might help with something else. A good example is like relationships with in-laws, for example. You know, I've seen couples where one partner will say, well, you don't take my side with your family, for example. And the partner may not even be aware of how that comes across as a betrayal to their partner. And also, there's some conversation that needs to be had around boundaries, around like, if you have a conflict with my mother, that's between you and my mother, not me and my mother. So there's some education that goes on, but mostly it is looking at how you're communicating with one another. First of all, starting to diffuse that conflict, teaching you some skills of how do we communicate in a way that does not make things worse, right? How do we learn how to take a break when I'm activated or you're activated, because nothing good happens once everybody's activated, right? It just doesn't. Nobody gets more rational as a fight escalates. So that would be kind of my general approach. I also come from a school of attachment theory, which basically, in essence, says if I understand your context, like how you got here, either as a couple and as a human being. So, what were your role models as a kid? What are your triggers in your life? What is your amygdala afraid of? What is it? What's keeping you stuck in this back part of your brain and away from this front part of your brain where empathy and compassion live? Sometimes we get stuck in fight or flight, and it doesn't serve us. And a lot of times, in my experience, that Larkins, I don't think that's a word, harkens back to something that happened in your childhood. And so inner child you is afraid, but that doesn't necessarily mean that adult you should be afraid. But sometimes if we don't get that out and shine some sunlight on it, it can stay scary. So that's kind of the gist of my approach. I am not perfect. I don't have anything figured out. I'm 100. I thought for sure I would have my act together at this point in life. I don't. But I think I have the best job in the world. And the reason is because I get to meet people behind their masks, the masks of perfection that we're all carrying around. um, and just love up on them in their imperfection, right? I have negative interest in judging you. Nothing about my life is perfect. I'm a hot mess express. So my experience has been when you can sit next to someone who is sitting on the imaginary back steps of my imaginary cabin, having really big feelings, when you can sit next to them, put your hand on their back and shut your mouth and simply accompany them in a non-judgmental, supportive way, unconditional way, people heal. It's some black voodoo magic. I don't know how it works, but I've seen it. So my suggestion is that maybe we start with the assessment, and then we can have a debrief session for to go through kind of what the assessment brought out, and then decide where we go from there. We also could do individual sessions leading up to that, so that you and your husband both feel like you get. Sorry, I didn't know if he's your husband or not. Have a chance to feel heard and kind of air your grievances about what's been going on and what it's been like for you, so that when we come back together, you can both feel safe that I will protect you. I'm not going to let things escalate. I'm not going to let things get injurious, right? There's just no need for that. And so if I'm aware of your sensitivity, sometimes I can communicate that to your partner in a way that they can hear it without being so defensive. So that's it in a nutshell. I'd love to work with you. Let me know.